Welcome to Echo 103, Study Session 1, The Nature and Structure of Nigerian Economy. Introduction. In this study session, you will examine the regional specialization of economic activities in Nigeria. You will also examine the sources and the trends of growth in this country, while also highlighting the factors that mitigate against growth and development in this country's economy. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to present an overview of the Nigerian economy, outline the macroeconomic framework of the Nigerian economy, differentiate between economic growth and development, point out sources of economic growth, analyze the growth trend of Nigeria since independence, highlight the factors inhibiting growth and development in the economy. An overview of Nigerian economy. Nigeria is a country that is blessed with abundant human and material resources. Before 1970s, the Nigerian economy was essentially agriculture-based. But with the first oil boom episode in Nigeria between 1973 and 1974, drilling and mining became the order of the day. Ever since then, petroleum and crude oil exports have been the major backbone of the Nigerian economy. This development notwithstanding, agriculture still continues to be the broad base of the economy as well as the most dominant sector, at least in terms of employment generation for the greater number of Nigerian labor force. Based on the foregoing, it is not an overstatement to say that petroleum and agriculture sectors provide the resource base of the Nigerians' wealth and the greater part of its economic activity, thereby accounting for at least 4/5 of the country's GDP. Despite the dominance of the petroleum sector as the major foreign exchange earner, agriculture remains the mainstay of Nigeria's economy. The sector provides employment for some 70 to 80% of the Nigeria's labor force. In addition to contributing the largest share of GDP, agriculture is the largest non-oil export earner and a key contributor to wealth creation and poverty alleviation, as a large percentage of the population derives its income from it and its related activities. The system of agricultural production in Nigeria includes the following. A. Peasant farming, which involves cultivation on small-scale subsistence output acres of land. It relies mainly on the traditional methods of farming with the use of simple implements like cutlass and hoe. And plantation farming, which involves the use of large estates of land permanently planted with economic or commercial crops like cotton, rubber, cocoa, palm tree, tea, coffee, etc. However, the pattern of agricultural production and specialization is largely dictated by the variation in the country's natural vegetation, soil, and climatic conditions. For example, staple tree and root crops that require much rain are mainly produced in the southern part of the country, whereas grains and livestock that require the little rain to produce are largely produced in the northern part. This indeed depicts the picture of the regional specialization of economic activity, which has greatly enhanced the growth of inter-regional trade in Nigeria over the years. More so, specialization in the production of export crops is also conditioned on the climatic variation across the country. Thus, export-free crops such as cocoa, rubber, palm, and wood, which require plenty rain, are heavily produced in the rainy south, while the country's other exports, groundnut and cotton, which require little rain, are concentrated in the drier north. The Middle Belt specializes mainly in the production of vegetable oil such as soybeans. Jos, the capital of Plateau State, has most of the metallic minerals such as tin, columbite, lead, and zinc. The mining of these minerals represents a sizable proportion of the world's output. More so, the mining of lead and zinc is observed in Abakaliki in Ebonyi State and in Owerri in Imo State. Coal mining is centered on Enugu in the southeastern part of the country. Lokoja, areas of Kwara State, and Enugu have been confirmed to be having considerable deposit of iron ore. Oil wells exist in rivers, Bayelsa, Cross Rivers, Delta, Imo, and in all other Niger Delta member states. Furthermore, manufacturing activities is mainly carried out in a few but relatively large urban centers. These centers include Lagos, Port Harcourt in Rivers State, Aba in Abia State, Onitsha in Anambra State, Enugu in Enugu State, and Owerri in Imo State. Manufacturing activities also go on in these cities located in the northern part of the country: Kaduna, Kano, Zaria. Manufacturing, like its sister sector, mining, is a rather small source of employment. Its contribution to the GDP and employment remains small. Macroeconomic framework: GDP growth, sectoral composition, and performance. This section will attempt to expose to you the macroeconomic framework using Nigeria as a case study. It will equip you with analytical tools to assess global economy. Macroeconomic framework defined. Economics as a discipline is broadly divided into macroeconomics and microeconomics. Macroeconomics is the aspect of economics that examines what determines total employment and production, consumption, investment in raising productive capacity, and how much a country imports and exports. It also asks what causes boom and slumps in the short run and what determines the long-term growth rate of the economy, the general level of prices, and the rate of inflation. Macroeconomics examines how these matters can and should be influenced by the government through monetary and fiscal policies. In essence, it is the study of the performance of the national economy as well as the policies used to improve that performance. The discussion and analysis of a given economy in order to see how it can be improved constitute what is referred to as a macroeconomic framework. More so, macroeconomic framework can also mean those basic underlying structures that present the future picture of a country's economy and the interrelatedness that exists within the economy. Basically, an analysis of an economy is more or less the analysis of the changes that exist in the output. Thus, the most widely accepted macroeconomic framework for analyzing the structure of an economy is Gross Domestic Product, GDP, or Gross National Product, GNP. Gross Domestic Product, gross national product. GDP is simply defined as the amount of final goods and services produced in any given economy within a specific period of time, usually 12 calendar months. It is the total sum of value added that is generated over a year in an economy. GDP is calculated using three approaches, mainly income approach, the output approach, and finally the expenditure approach. GNP, according to Anyali, 1991, is the total monetary value of goods and services produced in an economy, including the net revenue realized from the country's investment abroad. Net factor income from abroad makes the difference between GNP and GDP. Mathematically, we state that GNP equals GDP plus net factor income from abroad. Issues of importance when analyzing the GDP of an economy. GDP is the mirror through which the economic activities of any nation can be seen. In the analysis of the GDP of a given nation, the following issues, growth indicators, should be of interest. 1. The magnitude of the actual value of GDP should be considered. What is meant here is that the real GDP value, which is derived by removing inflation from the nominal GDP, should be used in the analysis of an economy. Considering the nominal GDP value may offer a misleading answer. 2. Changes in the GDP value over time. This means that the growth rate of the GDP from one period to another should be used to monitor the trend of the economy being analyzed. 3. The components of GDP are another issue of interest when analyzing an economy. Here the analyst should be able to know what that truly makes up the size of the GDP. The different sectors of the economy that have input in the GDP should be known. 4. The sectoral proportion in the GDP should equally be recognized. For example, the percentage contributions of the agricultural sector, the industrial sector, the building construction sector, etc. to the overall GDP should be considered with good sense of analysis. By this, the analyst captures the true performance of the economy. 5. The per capita income. This is obtained by dividing the GDP by the total population of the country. That is, GDP over total population. This index tells us the share of every individual member of the country from the overall GDP. Methods of analyzing the GDP. In analyzing the GDP, economics welcome mainly two methods, namely the descriptive analytical method and the comparative analytical method. The descriptive method, data that describe economic phenomena are compiled and analyzed using economic, mathematical, or statistical tools. The comparative method tries to draw a comparison of the different sectors of the economy so as to see their behavior in the process of generating output. Economic growth and development. Economic growth and development are parts of the major goals of every society. Oftentimes, people seem to use the two terms interchangeably, possibly thinking that they mean the same thing. The two terms do not exactly mean the same thing. We shall now examine them separately and then attempt to distinguish between them. Economic growth. According to Anyanwu and Okena, 1995, growth refers to the increase over time of an economy's capacity to produce those goods and services needed to improve the well-being of the citizens in increasing numbers and diversity. Todaro 1977 maintains that growth is the steady process by which the productive capacity of the economy is increased over time to bring about rising levels of national income. As Oxford Dictionary of Economics put it, growth is an increase in an economic variable, normally persisting over successive periods. However, rapid or persistent growth is likely to involve changes in the nature of economic activities with new products or processes and new types of labor skills, capital goods, and economic institutions. In addition, economic growth also refers to the increase in a country's production of income per capita. Recall that production is usually measured by GDP, which is total output of final goods and services produced within an economy under a specific time period, usually 1 year. Economic growth is quantitative in nature. The process of economic growth is determined by two types of factors, namely economic and non-economic. Economic growth is dependent upon natural resources, human resources, capital, enterprise, technology, etc. These are the economic factors. But economic growth is not possible without facilitating non-economic factors, according to Jenga 1997. Non-economic factors include social institutions, political conditions, and moral values in a nation. They are imperatives to development. Economic development. To King Legaba and Eric 1977, as contained in Ayahu and Oikenan 1995, economic development is generally defined to include improvements in material welfare, especially for persons with lowest income, the eradication of mass poverty with its correlates of illiteracy, disease, and early death, changes in the composition of inputs and output that generally include shift in the underlying structure of production away from agricultural towards industrial activities. It also refers to economic growth accompanied by changes in output distribution and economic structure. These changes may include an improvement in the material well-being of the poorer population, an increase in production and skills of the labor force, substantial technical advances originating within the country, improvement in the quality of goods and services produced in the economy. Thus, we can say that development is growth plus. Where the plus element is refers to the qualitative changes that are associated with the quantitative factors that bring about growth. Difference between economic growth and development. It is imperative for us to distinguish carefully between the concept of economic growth and economic development. Let us present a simple story of the changes that take place when a child is newly born as a means of driving home the distinction that exists between the two times. When a child is born, after a while, the child begins to increase in size as he eats food. This increase in size sometimes becomes obvious as the age of the child increases. However, even as the size of the child increases, it is expected of the child to start developing those skills that would enable him live a normal life in the society to which he belongs. Among these skills are how to talk and how to walk. The increase in size or height is what is referred to as the growth of the child. When the child begins to learn those skills as identified above, we say that the child is developing. In other words, it is possible for the child to be growing without developing. Development, as we have seen, is beyond growth. What adds meaning to the life of the child is his ability to develop and not to grow. As it's in the life of this child, so is it in the economy of any nation. Sometimes we hear that the GDP of Nigeria has increased by a certain amount, but we may not hear how this increase in GDP is being distributed among the Nigerian citizens. An increase in GDP without the corresponding change in the economic welfare of the Nigerian masses represents only the growth of the Nigerian economy and not development. When the output of goods and services produced in Nigeria increases without any improvement in their quality, we say that the economy is growing and not developing. Growth does not consider the welfare of the people. Central to any developmental plan is the people's welfare. Development should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. Development ensures the transformation of the entire economy from a less desirable to a more desirable one. It does this by bringing improvement in the material welfare of the people. For instance, developmental policies will, among other things, seek to improve the value of the people's income, reduce unemployment, provide basic infrastructure, fight corruption, ensure equitable distribution of national resources across the different geopolitical zones, ensure equal opportunity to education, avoid denial of justice, and so on. These issues are not a priority when growth alone grips the attention of any country. The question now is growth or development, which has gripped the attention of Nigeria. More so, economic development is a sustained growth. When growth becomes less sustained over a given period of time, we can say that development has taken place. In other words, before we can experience economic development, we must first have economic growth. Hence, we can conclude by saying that while development embraces growth, the opposite does not necessarily hold. The growth pattern of the Nigerian economy. At independence in 1960, Nigeria inherited a vibrant agricultural-based economy from our colonial masters. From 1960 to 1975, the growth performance of the Nigerian economy was encouraging, with agriculture taking the lead in terms of employment, output, and export. Between 1960 and early 1970s, the contribution of the manufacturing sector to GDP rose from 4.8% to 8.2%. This pattern changed when oil suddenly became the strategic importance of the world economy through its supply-price connection. The massive increase in oil revenue as a result of the Middle East War of 1973 created unprecedented, unexpected, and unplanned wealth for Nigeria. They began the dramatic shift of policies from a holistic approach to benchmarking them against the state of the oil sector. During the oil boom period, the average growth rate of output stood at 6.2%. According to Busari 2006, the recession in advanced Western economies which started in the late 1970s due to rising interest rates and high production costs, led to a sharp decline in Nigerian exports. The international price of crude oil collapsed. However, in the 1980s, the growth performance in Nigeria declined significantly. In 1986, Nigeria adopted a far-reaching economic reform known as a Structural Adjustment Program. The program came with various forms of deregulation and plans to diversify the economy. Between 1986 and 1997, GDP grew at 4% annually due to the various reforms pursued in the economy. A critical examination of the sectoral performance shows that pre-1980 position of the agricultural sector has not been restored, and in fact, the contribution of the extractive, mineral, and quarrying sector to GDP has increased over the years, so also in the contribution of the services sector. For a further insight into the growth pattern of the Nigerian economy, let us have a look at the following data compiled by the Development Economics LDB database. Between 1987 and 1997, the average annual growth rate of the GDP was 4% and GDP per capita 1%. Between 1997 and 2007, the GDP annual growth rate was 5.4% and GDP per capita growth rate was 2.8%. In 2006, the average annual growth rate for GDP was 6.2 and for GDP per capita it was 3.7. In 2007, it was 5.9 for GDP and 3.6 for GDP per capita. Between 2007 and 2011, it was 7.9 for GDP and 5.7 for GDP per capita. How to improve on the growth of Nigerian economy? According to needs, the improving growth of the Nigerian economy requires attention on the following issues. 1. Wealth creation. 2. Employment generation. 3. Poverty reduction. 4. Value reorientation. Sources of economic growth in Nigeria. The term economic growth is hereby defined as an outward shift of a nation's production possibility frontiers. A PPF simply represents the various possible combination of choices available to an economy in terms of different uses to which factors of production can be put. An example of PPF is depicted in the diagram below. Regardless of the roadmap adopted by a developed or developing economy, it is possible to identify a number of factors that determine economic growth. These factors are aptly captured in Ginga 1997 and are presented thus. The process of economic growth is determined by two types of actors, economic and non-economic. Economic growth is dependent upon its natural resources, human resources, capital, enterprise, technology, etc. These are economic factors. But economic growth is not possible so long as social institutions, political conditions, and moral values in a nation do not encourage development. These are non-economic factors. Factors inhibiting growth and development in Nigeria. As recognized by needs, factors that inhibit growth and development in Nigeria include 1. Inconsistent macroeconomic policy. 2. Instability and policy reversals. 3. Conflict between different macroeconomic goals. 4. Public sector dominance in production and consumption. 5. Persuasive rent sinking and corruption, facilitated by the fact that the government is the hub of economic activities. 6. Inadequate and decaying infrastructure. 7. High volatility of major macroeconomic aggregates. 8. Weak institutional capacity for economic policy management and coordination. 9. Unsustainability of public finance at all levels of government. 10. Lack of effective coordination across levels of government. 11. Large debt overhang. 12. High and rising unemployment, particularly with regard to graduates of tertiary institutions, as well as phenomenon of underemployment. 13. Neglect of the agricultural sector. 14. High inflation rate resulting from high depreciation of the value of the naira. 15. Low level of savings and investment. 16. High and rising population. Summary. We commence this session with an overview of resource distribution in Nigeria and an examination of regional specialization of economic activities in Nigeria. You are thereafter exposed to analytical skills to assess an economy. We also explore the sources of economic growth and development in Nigeria, factors that inhibit growth and development in the Nigerian economy, and how to improve on the growth rate of the Nigerian economy. This is the end of study session 1. Thanks for listening.